What happens when a movie doesn't just rattle audiences, but shakes governments, sparks protests, and even gets reels pulled from theaters? Europe has a long history of films that crossed a line no one even knew existed until the projector lit up. Some were hailed as art, others condemned as chaos. But one thing's certain, they weren't forgotten. Get ready, because these 15 stories will make you wonder just how far cinema can really go. Man Bites Dog, 1992. Imagine watching a film so convincing people walked out asking if it was real. That was the experience when Belgium unleashed Man Bites Dog. Styled as a black and white documentary, it follows a camera crew trailing a charismatic but ruthless criminal. What begins as dark humor quickly descends into unsettling territory as the crew stops observing and starts participating. The brilliance and controversy was in its style. The mock documentary format was so raw that many believed it blurred the line between reality and fiction. The violence was casual, sometimes laced with humor, and that made it all the more disturbing. Instead of a clear moral message, the film seemed to suggest that entertainment itself might be complicit. Authorities didn't know what to do with it. Censors in several countries banned or restricted screenings, claiming it glamorized violence. Critics, however, couldn't stop talking. Was it a savage satire on media, or an experiment gone too far? Viewers who saw it in small European theaters in the early 90s left shaken, debating if they had laughed at something they shouldn't have. The film's legacy is undeniable. It became a cult sensation passed around by cinephiles who admired its daring approach. Its influence can be traced in countless later films that explore the role of the camera in shaping morality. Yet, for many, the discomfort never faded. Man Bites Dog proved that sometimes the scariest monster on screen isn't the villain, it's the lens filming him. Possession, 1981. Few performances in European cinema caused as much uproar as Isabelle Adjani's in Possession. This French and West German co-production begins like a straightforward drama about a disintegrating marriage, but quickly unravels into something unclassifiable. Adjani's portrayal of a woman consumed by forces she can't control is as unforgettable as it is unsettling. The most infamous moment? A subway scene where Adjani spirals into a frenzy of emotion that left audiences horrified and mesmerized. It wasn't staged like a typical thriller. It felt raw, chaotic, even dangerous. That intensity earned her the Cannes Best Actress award, but it also got the film banned or heavily cut in several countries. What set Possession apart was its refusal to offer easy answers. Director Andrzej Żuławski poured his own personal turmoil into the story, creating a film that blended psychological drama with surreal horror. Critics at the time didn't know how to categorize it. Some called it genius, others dismissed it as hysteria on film. Authorities weren't any kinder. The United Kingdom placed it on the infamous video nasties list, cutting minutes of footage before it could be released. Other countries pulled it from circulation altogether. Yet, wherever it was banned, demand only grew. Bootleg copies circulated, turning it into a whispered legend among cinephiles. Today, Possession is considered a masterpiece of European cinema. But its legacy rests on more than awards or bans. It remains one of those rare films that doesn't just tell a story, it invades the viewer's mind. And for censors of the early 80s, that was too much to allow. Ilsa She Wolf of the SS, 1975. If you want a prime example of a film that rattled Europe to its core, look no further than Ilsa She Wolf of the SS. Produced between Canada and West Germany, it masqueraded as a war drama, but quickly revealed itself as an exploitation shocker, with no intention of playing by the rules. The premise alone was enough to cause panic. Set in a fictional prisoner camp, the film pushed boundaries with its lurid content, graphic themes, and unapologetically over-the-top villainous. Played by Diane Thorne. Ilsa wasn't just a character, she was a force of outrage. European audiences had never seen anything like it. Censors reacted immediately. In the United Kingdom, it was outright banned. Ireland and Norway quickly followed, with other European countries restricting it to the underground circuit. Even in West Germany, where part of the film had been shot, authorities bristled at its release. The controversy was so intense that prints were confiscated and the movie lived on primarily in smuggled VHS tapes. Critics dismissed it as trash, but fans of grindhouse cinema considered it iconic. Its sheer audacity kept it alive long after most films of its kind faded into obscurity. For decades, it stood as a symbol of what happens when filmmakers chase provocation at all costs. Today, it remains banned in some territories, yet clips are easy to find online. Whether you view it as a cultural low point or a cult classic, Ilsa proved one thing: Europe's censors were always watching, but they couldn't erase audience curiosity. Tenebrae, 1982. When Italian master Dario Argento released Tenebrae, he probably didn't expect it to become one of the most infamous video nasties in Britain. On the surface, it's a stylish Giallo thriller about a writer caught in a series of copycat crimes. But Argento's use of color camera movement and unflinching detail elevated it from pulp to art, or depending on who you asked, from suspense to pure provocation. Audiences were drawn in by its hypnotic atmosphere and shocking set pieces. The film's most famous moment, an elaborate tracking shot across an apartment building that leads to a brutal confrontation, is still studied in film schools. But that same sequence had censors in the early 80s fuming. In Britain, the authorities added Tenebrae to their banned list, claiming it encouraged dangerous behavior. Other European countries demanded heavy cuts, stripping away the very elements that made it a signature Argento work. Critics were divided. Some hailed it as the director's return to form, while others accused him of glorifying cruelty. What kept Tenebrae alive during the bans was its underground following. Bootleg tapes circulated widely, cementing its reputation as forbidden fruit. By the time bans lifted years later, it had already become a legend. For fans of Italian horror, Tenebrae wasn't just a thriller, it was a rallying cry against censorship. Even now, it's remembered as the Argento film that authorities couldn't silence. Stylish, shocking, and impossible to forget. Tenebrae is proof that sometimes the more a film is suppressed, the stronger its legacy grows. The House on the Edge of the Park, 1980. Ruggero Deodato already had a reputation for controversy after Cannibal Holocaust, but he wasn't done testing boundaries. With The House on the Edge of the Park released in 1980, he traded the Amazon jungle for an upscale suburban setting, but the discomfort was just as severe. The story follows two outsiders who crash a wealthy party, leading to a night of escalating intimidation and chaos. David Hess, already notorious from The Last House on the Left, delivered a performance so intense that audiences were left stunned. The mix of social commentary and raw tension made the film both magnetic and appalling. Censors in Britain didn't hesitate. The House on the Edge of the Park was banned outright, branded too extreme for public viewing. Even when it was later allowed, entire minutes were cut, leaving viewers with a heavily watered-down version. Across Europe, the response was similar: bans, restrictions, and controversy. What set it apart wasn't just shock value. Deodato used the film to explore class conflict, showing how privilege and vulnerability collide in terrifying ways. But the message was often lost in the uproar about its content. For years, it existed mainly in bootleg form, whispered about by horror fans. When uncut versions finally resurfaced decades later, critics reassessed it as more than exploitation. It was a time capsule of cinema's most daring edge. Today, it remains divisive. Some see it as a gripping critique of society's darkest impulses. Others view it as exploitation taken too far. Either way, The House on the Edge of the Park secured its place as one of Europe's most banned and debated films. Der Todesking, 1990. Germany has a long history of pushing cinematic boundaries, but few films rattled audiences like Der Todesking. Directed by Jörg Buttgereit, the film doesn't follow a single story. Instead, it presents 7 short chapters, each tied together by the theme of death and despair. The result is less a narrative and more an experience, a grim meditation that audiences were not prepared for. What shocked people wasn't just the subject matter, but the way it was presented. Each vignette showed a different scenario, blending surreal imagery with unsettling realism. There was no traditional character arc, no clear hero, only an atmosphere of unease that left viewers disoriented. Even the transitions images of a human body slowly decaying felt like an assault on the senses. When it premiered in 1990, authorities in Germany and beyond were quick to react. Some theaters refused to screen it at all. In other European countries, censors demanded heavy cuts or pulled the film outright. The word dangerous started to circulate not because the film encouraged bad behavior, but because it dared to dwell so relentlessly on themes society preferred to avoid. Critics were split. Some dismissed it as grotesque shock art. Others saw it as a powerful statement on the inevitability of mortality and the hidden violence of everyday life. Butgereit himself claimed he wanted to confront viewers with their own discomfort rather than offer simple entertainment. Over the years, Der Todesking became a cult artifact. Fans admired its uncompromising style and its refusal to sugarcoat anything. Detractors argued it crossed lines without purpose. But its place in the pantheon of banned European films is secure. It proved that sometimes the most unsettling movies aren't those filled with spectacle, but those that force us to stare at truths we'd rather ignore. The Beast, 1975. French cinema has never been shy about provocation, but few films sent censors into panic mode quite like The Beast. Directed by Walerian Borowczyk, this surreal work blurred the line between fairy tale nightmare and art film. Set against the backdrop of an aristocratic family trying to arrange a marriage, it spun into a dreamlike story filled with wild symbolism. What rattled audiences was its refusal to play by any cinematic rules. Borowczyk filled the screen with lush imagery, strange rituals, and fantastical sequences that left viewers unsure whether they were watching a period drama, a parody, or a fever dream. Critics didn't know how to categorize it. Was it satire? Was it surrealist art? Or was it just too much? Censors leaned toward the last option. Across Europe, The Beast faced bans, delayed releases, and harsh edits. In Britain, it was denied certification altogether for years. In other territories, it was quietly shelved, making it one of those films you heard about long before you ever had the chance to see it. For the audiences who did catch it, the reaction was unforgettable. Some praised its audacity, calling it a daring critique of hypocrisy and repression. Others stormed out in anger. The film became a litmus test for tolerance-sparking debates not just about art, but about where societies draw the line on what can be shown. Decades later, The Beast has been reclaimed by many as a cult classic. Seen through modern eyes, its dreamlike qualities and fearless style are admired as bold rather than reckless. But its banning in the 1970s reminds us that sometimes it's not just the images themselves, but the imagination behind them that frightens authorities most. Angst, 1983. Austria may not be the first country you think of when it comes to shocking cinema, but Angst carved out a reputation that spread across Europe like wildfire. Directed by Gerald Cargill, it told the story of a disturbed man released from prison who spirals into chaos. What set it apart was the way it was filmed, raw, relentless, and disturbingly intimate. The camera work itself became legendary. Using custom rigs, Cargill and cinematographer Zbigniew Rybczynski created floating shots that followed the central figure with unnerving closeness. The result felt less like watching a movie and more like being trapped inside someone's head. For many viewers, that perspective was almost unbearable. Authorities wasted no time. In West Germany, the film was banned outright. Other European nations restricted it so heavily that screenings were nearly impossible. Even in Austria, its home country, it faced fierce resistance. Critics described it as oppressive harrowing and unlike anything they had ever seen. Yet for those who endured it, the experience was unforgettable. Some praised it as a landmark in psychological cinema, a raw exploration of fear and obsession. Others dismissed it as exploitative. Either way, it became one of the most whispered-about banned films of the 1980s, circulating underground among horror enthusiasts who dared each other to track it down. Today, Angst has been re-evaluated by scholars and cinephiles alike. It's recognized for its technical innovation and its chilling ability to immerse the audience in a state of dread. But its banning serves as a reminder. Sometimes the most powerful films aren't the ones with spectacle, but the ones that force you to confront the darkest corners of the human psyche. Christiane F., 1981. Not all banned films relied on shocking imagery to cause panic. Sometimes simply being too real was enough. That was the case with Christiane F., a West German film released in 1981. Based on a best-selling biography, it followed the life of a young girl navigating the harsh realities of urban life in Berlin. What made it shocking wasn't exaggeration, but authenticity. Director Uli Edel chose to shoot on real locations, subway stations, housing estates, dimly lit streets, capturing the grid of the city with almost documentary precision. The performances, particularly from the young lead, felt heartbreakingly genuine. Audiences didn't feel like they were watching actors. They felt like they were witnessing lives unravel in real time. Authorities across Europe reacted nervously. The United Kingdom and several Scandinavian countries restricted or outright banned the film, claiming it was too raw for public consumption. Some critics worried it might influence vulnerable viewers, while others argued it was a necessary wake-up call. Despite the bans, Christiane F developed a cult following. Its soundtrack, dominated by music from David Bowie, only added to its legend, tying the film to the cultural pulse of the early 80s. Young audiences passed around copies, seeing in it both a cautionary tale and a reflection of realities adults often ignored. Today, the film is remembered as a milestone in German cinema, praised for its honesty and artistry. But its history as a banned work shows how even truth, when presented without compromise, can frighten censors more than fantasy ever could. Christiane F proved that sometimes reality itself is the most shocking story of all. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. By the late 70s, Europe had already seen its share of controversial imports. But when I Spit on Your Grave arrived, censors came down hard. Though it originated in the United States, its European release created a storm so intense it cemented its place on banned lists across the continent. On the surface, it was framed as a revenge thriller. What made it infamous was the way it lingered on suffering before turning to retribution. Audiences were left deeply divided. Was it empowerment, exploitation, or something more complex? The raw style and relentless tone meant there was no escape for viewers once the film began. In Britain, the authorities labeled it a video nasty and banned it outright for years. Ireland quickly followed, pulling it from circulation. Other European countries only allowed it, with extreme cuts removing large portions of the running time. The controversy wasn't limited to governments. Critics wrote scathing reviews, calling it one of the most troubling films of its time. Yet, like many banned works, its reputation only grew. Bootleg VHS copies circulated, especially among horror fans, curious to see what had caused such uproar. Some defended it as a harsh statement on violence, while others argued it was never meant to be seen by the public at all. Today, it sits as one of the most debated films of the 70s, still carrying the weight of its bans. Whether you view it as misguided or groundbreaking, one thing is certain: it forced Europe to confront just how far cinema could go before society slammed the door shut. Giallo a Venezia, 1979. Italy has long been a hub for stylish thrillers, but Giallo a Venezia took things to an extreme that rattled even seasoned fans of the genre. Released in 1979, this film combined the hallmarks of Italian giallo mystery, suspense, and striking visuals with a level of intensity that quickly drew the attention of censors. The story followed an investigation into a grisly death in Venice, weaving together detective work and unsettling flashbacks. But what set it apart wasn't the narrative, it was the tone. Director Mario Landi pushed the envelope with scenes so graphic and prolonged that audiences left theaters shaken. Even in a genre known for excess, this one stood out. The backlash was immediate. In Britain, it landed on the banned list, denied classification for decades. In other parts of Europe, it was shelved-screened only in underground circuits or in heavily cut editions. Critics at the time had little patience for it, with many dismissing it as an exercise in excess without substance. But time has given it a strange second life. Collectors and cult cinema fans now see it as an artifact of its era, a film that shows just how far Italian thrillers were willing to go. Its rarity only added to its allure, with uncut copies circulating in hushed tones for years. Today, Giallo a Venezia is still controversial. Some argue it pushed too far for shock value alone, while others see it as a key example of Italian cinema's fearless streak. Either way, its banning ensured it would never fade quietly into obscurity. Salò, Children of the Revolution, 2009. By the time the 2000s rolled around, many thought European cinema had outgrown the era of outright bans. Then came Salò, Children of the Revolution, a Czech and British co-production that paid homage to Pasolini's notorious Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, the very connection guaranteed it would ignite controversy. This version shifted the backdrop to modern unrest, using the framework of authority and control to craft a story that echoed Pasolini's bleak vision. It wasn't a remake so much as a reinterpretation, but the parallels were impossible to ignore. Audiences braced themselves for a ride into discomfort, and they got exactly that. European boards reacted with alarm. Some countries banned it outright, refusing to let it into theaters. Others only allowed it under strict conditions with significant edits. The Czech Republic itself struggled with whether to embrace it as commentary or suppress it as provocation. Critics were divided down the middle. Some praised it for daring to tackle themes of power and corruption in a contemporary setting. Others dismissed it as unnecessary provocation, trading on the reputation of a classic. Either way, the bans made it a subject of debate far beyond its actual release numbers. For audiences who managed to see it, the response was polarizing. Some left calling it a bold statement for a new generation, while others vowed never to watch again. Its fate mirrored that of Pasolini's original, a film too controversial to fade into obscurity. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Sweden isn't usually the first country that comes to mind when discussing banned cinema, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture changed that perception overnight. Released in 1973, this revenge tale was promoted as the movie too shocking for Europe, and for once the tagline was true. The film follows a young woman pushed into a cycle of violence, transforming from victim to avenger. What stunned audiences was the ruthless commitment to detail. The director Bo Arne Vibenius leaned into a gritty, almost documentary style, using slow-motion sequences and bold visuals that made the violence impossible to ignore. Authorities reacted quickly. In Sweden, it was heavily censored. In Britain and much of Europe, it was denied release altogether. Even in the United States, where cult audiences often embraced extreme cinema, it faced similar restrictions. The result was a reputation that grew faster than its availability. Critics slammed it as exploitative, but cult audiences rallied behind it. Quentin Tarantino himself later cited it as a major influence on his own work, and that endorsement gave the film new life decades later. Still, its banning across Europe ensured it would remain less accessible than most of its contemporaries. Today, Thriller is remembered as both a landmark of Swedish cinema and a case study in censorship. The bans may have limited its reach, but they also cemented its legend. Watching it now, you can see why it caused such panic. Its rawness feels less like a product of the 70s and more like a challenge to audiences even today. Dogtooth, 2009. Greece entered the spotlight of international cinema in 2009 with Dogtooth, a film that critics hailed as daring and audiences found disturbing. Directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, it told the story of a family isolated from the outside world, creating their own rules, language, and reality. The concept alone was enough to raise eyebrows, but the execution left people unsettled long after the credits rolled. What made Dogtooth so controversial was its atmosphere of control and manipulation. Every detail, from the sterile home environment to the bizarre lessons the children were taught, created a sense of unease. It wasn't a horror film in the traditional sense, but it left audiences squirming like few thrillers could. European authorities weren't sure what to make of it. Some countries slapped on strict age restrictions, keeping it away from younger audiences. Others debated whether it crossed a moral line altogether. The controversy spread with debates in newspapers and television over whether the film was art provocation or both. Despite, or perhaps because of the backlash, Dogtooth won the Prix in certain regard at Cannes and went on to be nominated for an Academy Award. Its rise from banned oddity to celebrated art house success only fueled its legend. Viewers who managed to see it during its limited screenings became part of the conversation, praising its originality while warning others about its discomforting content. Today, Dogtooth is recognized as one of the defining European films of the 21st century, but its path to that status was anything but smooth. Its banning and restrictions remind us that even in modern times, cinema can still terrify gatekeepers simply by presenting a world too strange, too unsettling, and too close to home. So, what do these 15 films tell us? That in Europe, cinema has never just been about entertainment, it's been about boundaries and what happens when you crash straight through them. Some of these movies were banned for their style, others for their substance, and a few simply for daring to exist. But each one carved a place in history, proving that the most shocking stories aren't always the ones on screen, they're the battles fought to keep them hidden. Which of these films surprised you most? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with someone who loves the edge of cinema history.